This is creature number 1 in our Sculpting Basics Creature Series. In this video, we'll be sculpting this creature here. Be sure to check out the intro to the series, where we review the sculpting tools we'll be using throughout the series, as well as remeshing. The concept for the creature series was to come up with a unique character that isn't any existing animal, but something that is inspired by other animals that exist or have existed in the past, in order to create something new. From these reference resources, I created some initial sketches. From those sketches, I zeroed in on this creature here. I took that initial sketch and expanded it into different views for side, top, front, and back, and then added some color. I'll use those sketches as a guide for the sculpture. So let's get started. First off, we'll create a multi-view workspace. Go to the bottom right corner and hover until you see a plus sign, then drag. Then split the left side in half. In the bottom left, click 1 on the numpad for a front view. At top, click on 7 for a top view. Delete the default cube and turn off the camera. We'll start with the body. In object mode, go to Add and add a UV sphere. Then switch to Sculpt mode. We'll remesh to 0.05, turn on mirroring, and then begin manipulating the mesh. Be sure to remesh as you go. Start off with the elastic deform tool. Use the smooth tool. Remesh. Back to elastic deform. Remesh. Next up is the trunk. Switch back to object mode. Go to Add and then Add Cylinder. Scale down. Move. Then rotate. Scale using normal. Move into place. Switch back into sculpt mode. Remesh at 0.05. Mirror on the x-axis. Start off with the elastic deform tool. Grab tool. Select the clay tool and add volume and sculpt. Smooth tool, elastic deform, smooth, clay tool, elastic deform, crease tool, elastic deform, grab tool, smooth tool, back to the grab, elastic deform. Next up is the front leg. Switch back to object mode, go to Add, and then Add Cylinder. then Scale, switch back into Sculpt mode, remesh at 0.05, switch to the Clay tool, Smooth tool, Elastic Deform. Next up are the front toes, so switch to Object mode, go to Add, and then add a UV sphere and scale down. The next thing we'll do is to cut the sphere in half using a Blender built-in add-on called the Bool Tool, which is similar to the Boolean modifier. To save time, I'll add a link in the description to a tutorial on how to use the Bool Tool add-on. I'll add a cube and align the cube to cover half the sphere. Under the Object menu, I'll scroll down to the Bool Tool and select Difference. Move into place and add a subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out, then apply the modifier. Next, we'll switch into Sculpt mode, remesh at 0.05, then continue on to manipulating the mesh. Go back to Object mode, and one thing I forgot to mention is how to hide. Simply click on an object and hit the H key. To bring the object back into view, hit the Alt-H or Option-H on a Mac. And now we'll duplicate using the Command or Control-D key to duplicate the other toes. Next is the back leg. We'll duplicate the front leg as a starting point, then switch into Sculpt mode and continue sculpting. Now for the back toes. We'll switch back to Object mode, then duplicate the front toes and move them to the back. Okay, what we'll be doing next is duplicating the legs and toes for the left side. We'll do this by mirroring. However, in order to mirror the objects when we duplicate, we'll need to use the mirror modifier. I'll pause the sculpting for a moment to do a demo on how mirroring works. First off, we'll switch into Object mode, add a cube, then I'll switch to Edit mode, and I'll make the object shape uneven so we can see the mirroring. There's basically 5 steps of switching back and forth between Edit and Object mode to complete the mirroring. Step 1. Switch back to Object mode to add a mirror modifier. Go to the Modifier tab, then add the mirror modifier. The mirror modifier is added, but it's hard to see because the object's origin, which is the orange dot in the middle, and the center point for mirroring, is in the center of the mesh. Step 2. Switch back to Edit mode, toggle X-ray, select the mesh, and move the mesh off-center from the object origin. And now you can see the mirroring more clearly. You can mirror along any of the axes. Step 3. Switch back to Object mode to apply the modifier. Go to the Modifier tab and hit Apply. The mirror modifier is applied, but the two parts are still part of the same object, and we'll need to separate them. So switch back to Edit mode in order to separate them. Switch to Toggle X-ray mode in order to select the mesh of one of the objects. Once selected, then hit the P key to separate. Step 5, switch back to Object mode and you'll see the objects are separate, and now you can move them independently. So now we can apply that technique to our creature sculpture. Okay, go to Object mode and select the right front leg. One little sidebar: when you perform a series of transformations on an object, it's a good idea to apply the transformations, because not doing so may lead to odd behavior, such as when applying a mirror modifier. So I'll go ahead and apply all the transformations, as well as set the origin to geometry. This will set the center point for mirroring. I'll add a mirror modifier, switch back to Edit mode, go to Toggle X-ray, select the mesh, and separate. Go back to Object mode to apply the modifier. Switch to Edit mode, select half of the mesh, and separate by clicking on the P key. Then go back to Object mode, set origin to geometry on both objects, toggle X-ray off, and move into place. Next is the toes. Go to Object mode, select the front toes, apply all the transformations, as well as set origin to geometry, add the mirror modifier, switch back to Edit mode, go to Toggle X-ray, select the mesh, and separate. Go back to Object mode to apply the modifier. Switch to Edit mode, select half of the mesh, and separate by clicking on the P key. Then go back to Object mode, set origin to geometry on both objects, toggle X-ray off, and move into place. And you can repeat the same steps for the back legs and toes. Okay, next we'll add the area behind the head. Start off adding a circle object. Use the Transform tool to move the circle up. Go into Edit mode. Press the F key to fill the shape. Click on the E key to extrude, and then use the Transform tool and drag up. Next, click on Face Select, and then select a face. Click Ctrl R to add edge loops and hit Enter. Select the center edge loop and click on S to scale. Select the next edge loops on top and bottom and click on S to scale. Switch back to Object mode, then use the Transform tool to rotate, scale down, and then move into place. To smooth it out, we'll add a subdivision surface modifier, increase the viewport levels to 3, and then apply the modifier. Next we'll move into Sculpt mode and remesh at 0.05. Turn on symmetry for the x-axis, then we'll start off sculpting with the elastic Deform tool. Switch to the Smooth tool, then switch into Object mode and make some sizing adjustments. Next up is the tail. From Object mode, click on the body object, then switch into Sculpt mode. We'll click on the Snake Hook tool and sculpt the tail. Then back to the Grab tool. Now for the eyes, switch back to object mode. We'll unhide the legs. Add UV sphere. Use the transform tool to scale and move into place. We'll add a subdivision surface modifier to smooth out the object. Then use the multi-view in the lower left to duplicate and move into place. Okay, next up is the plates that will run along the back. In object mode, we'll add a cube. Switch to edit mode. We'll adjust the initial shape. Then switch to sculpting mode, remesh. Sculpt the initial plate using the clay tool. Remesh. Switch back to object mode. Use the transform tool to move the first plate into place. Rotate, size, duplicate, rotate, and then repeat for the rest of the plates. What we'll be doing next is to go around and add some additional form and creases. In object mode, click on the body object and switch into sculpt mode. And add additional form and creases around the eyes and legs. We'll start off with the clay tool. Switch to the smooth tool, the crease tool, and then back to the clay tool. Switch back to object mode, then select the front leg, switch into sculpt mode, and add additional form and creases around the toes. Switch to smooth, and then to crease. And then repeat for each leg. Next, select the trunk, switch into sculpt mode, and add creases to the trunk. And then lastly, we'll add creases to the tail. Next, we'll collapse the multi-view. Click in the corner of each panel and drag on top of the others. And there you have it, our finished creature. Next, we'll be moving on to texture painting. Switch to texture paint mode. We'll start off with the body. Click on the Active Tool tab on the right in the Properties panel. Create a texture image under Texture slot and name the texture image. Change the resolution to 2048. Choose an initial color. Switch to Viewport Shading to see the color. Then open the sidebar and click on the Tool tab. In the Color Picker, choose a color. Create a palette, then add the color to the palette. Select the Paint bucket in the Tool menu at left. We'll need to do a UV unwrap first. Switch to Edit mode and do a UV Smart Unwrap. Go back to Texture mode. Click on the Paint bucket, then click on the object to fill the color. Switch to Image Editor in the left panel. Switch back to Object Mode to select the trunk object, then switch back to Texture Paint Mode. Click on the Active Tool tab in the Properties panel. Create a texture image under the Texture slot. Give the texture image a name. Next, we'll switch into Edit Mode and do a UV Smart Unwrap. Go to the Color Picker and we'll add a hex color for orange and add it to the palette. Click on the Paint bucket, then click on the object to fill the color. In order to see the text painting better, we'll take a moment to add some lights. Go to Object Mode and duplicate the default lights. Move a couple lights down to offset some of the dark shadows. Next up is legs. First, we'll join the legs together to create a single object. Select each leg, then hit Command or Control J. Click on the Active Tool tab in the Properties panel. Create a texture image under the Texture slot. Give the texture image a name. Switch to Edit Mode. Select the mesh of each leg and do a UV Smart Unwrap. In the Image Editor tab, click on the Paint bucket and then click on the object to fill the color. Next up is the toes. In Object Mode, select the toes, then join to create a single object. Click on the Active Tool tab, create a texture image under the Texture slot, and give the texture a name. Switch to Edit Mode, and do a UV Smart Unwrap. In the Image Editor tab, click on the Paint bucket, then click on the object to fill the color. Next up is the area behind the head. Click on the Active Tool tab, create a texture image under Texture slot, give the texture image a name, switch to Edit Mode, and do a UV Smart Unwrap. In the Image Editor tab, click on the Paint bucket, then click on the object to fill the color. Moving on to the plates, same routine. Click on the Active Tool tab, create a texture image under the Texture slot, give the texture a name, switch to Edit Mode and do a UV Smart Unwrap. And in the Image Editor tab, click on the Paint bucket and click on the object to fill the color. Switch to Object Mode to select the right eye. Click on the Active Tool tab, create a texture image under the Texture slot, and give the texture image a name. Switch to Edit Mode and do a UV Smart Unwrap. In the Image Editor tab, click on the Paint bucket and click on the object to fill the color white. Next, we'll select the paintbrush in the Image Editor. In the Color Picker, select a black color and add it to the palette. Then we'll add the pupil. Repeat those steps for the left eye. We'll return to the area behind the head to add a color pattern. Switch to Object Mode to select. Then switch to Texture Paint Mode. Go to the Color Picker. We'll add a hex color for a darker orange and then add it to the color palette. Then we'll create a crisscross pattern. Next, we'll switch back to Sculpt mode and add some spikes around the discs at the end of the color bands. We'll switch back to the body and add some orange spots to the back. Then we'll add some stripes to the tail. The last step will be to create a platform. Go to Object Mode and add a circle object. Scale up using the S key. Go to Edit Mode, click on the F key to create a face, then click on the E key to extrude. Click on a face, and then hit Ctrl R to add some edge loops. Add a subdivision surface modifier, then adjust the edge loops for a wider edge. Use the Transform tool to move down. To add color, we'll just use the Materials tab and choose a green color. And there you have it, our final creature. That concludes the first creature in our Sculpting Creature series. Thanks for watching. If you found this tutorial useful, I invite you to like and subscribe for more. I welcome any feedbacks in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.